As some of you know, I'm a bit of a nutter for time-lapses and hyperlapses, and I have done a lot of videos about them. Of course, I'm also very fond of drones, so I should be very much into drone hyperlapses. But so far there's been several issues regarding hyperlapses made with drones, and it hasn't been possible to get a quality close to the one that we can achieve with regular cameras. With the Mavic 2 line things got better, but some issues still remained. I've been impressed by the quality of photos in the Mavic Air 2, but can it finally achieve professional standard hyperlapses and time-lapses? We will find out in this very in-depth analysis, so let's get going. When I received my Air 2 with the Fly More combo, I immediately noticed that DJI supplied a set of 3 ND filters. Nice touch, DJI. One of the filters is a ND256, clearly to be used for time-lapses or hyperlapses, where a much slower shutter speed is needed. This is a very good sign, as it means that DJI is taking hyperlapses very seriously. After shooting an hyperlapse, the Air 2 is able to run this version of the clip, either in 1080p or in a new 8K mode. But in order to get the most of our hyperlapse, it is much better to save the individual shots as raw files and then post-process them. The settings for hyperlapses are context sensitive, so we need first to choose hyperlapse in the photo video menu. Then we can tap on the 3 dots on the top right of the screen, choose camera, and you will be presented with several choices specific to the hyperlapse mode. First of all, I suggest to choose manual white balance and select the Kelvin value best suited to the condition. For reference, a value of around 5400 is fine for sandy conditions. Scrolling up, you can choose the resolution of the automatic rendering between 1080 and 8K. If choosing 1080, there is a choice to save the single files as RAW, JPEG, or to discard them. When shooting in 8K mode, it is not possible to save the individual files. Also, note that 8K mode is available only when shooting in Waypoints and free modes, but not in circle and coarse lock. Let's go with the first mode. In coarse lock, an aircraft will fly straight in a given direction, regardless of where the camera is pointing. I'm setting the drone to fly diagonally to this monastery, getting a bit closer to it while revealing Mount Etna in the background. Once I have chosen the desired direction, I click on the first icon to the left, Unlocked, which will turn yellow and show that the direction is now locked. Then we choose the frequency of shots. In the Mavic 2 Pro we could only choose a frequency of 1 shot every 2 seconds with JPEG files, while in order to use RAW files the minimum frequency was 1 shot every 6 seconds. That was a huge issue, as with hyperlapses in most cases we want to use a frequency of shot every 2 or 3 seconds. 6 seconds is way too long. So with the Mavic 2 line we could basically use only JPEG photos. But DJI has listened to what I said, as now we can indeed use a frequency of 2 seconds with RAW files. It is a massive bonus, as we will see later on. Then we choose the length of the final clip. I generally like to take hyperlapses of around 12 seconds. Since I will be doing several ones, I choose 10 seconds so that I'm sure I can easily make 2 of them with 1 battery. As you can see, it will take 250 shots and will last for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Then we choose the speed. We have a much wider choice now and we can go as low as 0.1 meters per second, much lower than what was possible with the Mavic 2 line. In this case I settled for 0.6 meters per second, about 2 feet. Finally we choose a target by drawing a box around it. The camera will follow the target as the aircraft advances in the lock direction. If we do not choose a target, the camera will point towards the lock direction. Once we're ready, we can hit the red shutter icon and the hyperlapse will start. There is a display of the time remaining to the end of time lapse, the number of shots taken, and a handy icon to increase the length of the clip by 1 minute, practically adding 25 more shots. One of the main issues with hyperlapses made with drones is due to the fact that there is in general more distortion than with a normal camera. When the video is stabilized in post-processing, there can be some warping. Some part of the image seems to move independently from the rest. The closer we are to a foreground element, the more pronounced the warping will be. I have chosen to move progressively closer to the charge to test issues due to distortion. I find course lock mode extremely useful. The camera follows our target in a very smooth way while the aircraft advances. The only limitation is that the controls are disabled. We cannot ascend, pan, get close or farther away from the target, or tilt the camera. When shooting time-lapses with a camera on a tripod, using a frequency of 1 shot every 2 seconds, I would use a shutter speed of 1 second for optimal motion blur. But with a drone in motion, such a low shutter speed may cause artifacts, so we have to compromise. In this case, I stay on the safe side by choosing a shutter speed of 1/6 of a second. I am of course using an ND265 filter to be able to use such a low speed. After taking all the shots, the 1080 hyperlapse is rendered in a few seconds, ready to be posted on social media if you feel the urge. Let's have a look. I must admit that it is actually quite good. As we get close to the monastery, there is, as expected, a tiny bit of wobble, but not very pronounced. The one thing I do not like is that there is not enough motion blur in the moving cars. The shutter speed was too fast. The raw files have been saved in a specific folder for each time-lapse, which is handy. I'm not going to show here how I post-process them as it would take too much time. I will do another video about it. I use Lightroom and After Effects, and this is the result after very light color grading and stabilizing. I really like it. The dynamic range is excellent, with plenty of detail in the shadows, nice color, good sharpness, and hardly any noise at all. I also made a second version with a more aggressive post-processing in order to see how the files respond. And the result is again very good, with no artifacts whatsoever. These are excellent raw files. Orbiting is always a very cinematic move, especially when there are different layers at different distances in the scene, thus creating a parallax effect. In circle mode, we are presented with a very similar menu to the one in course lock. We can set the frequency of shots, the length of the video, and the speed of the drone. The only difference is the last icon to the right, where we can set the direction, clockwise or anti-clockwise. We need to select our target by drawing a box around it, and we are good to go. Notice that this time I have set a shutter speed of 1/3 of a second, which should give a more realistic motion blur to the cars. With the setting I'm just a touch overexposed, but we should be fine. For a few seconds the drone rotates in the desired direction, analyzing the scene. When ready, it will start taking photos, while orbiting around the target at a constant radius. As in course lock, we cannot use the sticks of the remote controller or the wheel for tilting the gimbal during the hyperlapse. The resulting auto-generated clip is quite good. But the one post-processed from the raw file is in a totally different league. I'm again impressed by the quality of the raw files produced, even though there are only 12 million pixels. Warping for distortion is also very low. Notice that the movement of the cars is now much smoother, due to the lower shutter speed. This one was made at a higher speed of 1 meter per second, while this one had the lowest possible speed, 0.1 meter per second. I really like the ability to shoot hyperlapses with a very subtle movement, especially in scenes already containing moving parts. In theory, this mode is the most spectacular and should allow practically any move, as we can set individual points where we specify the position, the height, the direction of the camera, and the tilt of the gimbal. The software will handle the smooth transition from a point to the next. When we choose the icon at the bottom of the Hyperlapse menu, we are presented with this menu. We fly to our first point, frame our shot, and tap on the first box with the plus sign on the left. The position of the drone, the height, the direction of the camera, and the tilt of the gimbal will be recorded. As you can see, I'm above this church looking down, and I set the first point. The idea is to mimic a crane shot by moving backwards, reducing elevation while tilting the gimbal up to keep the church centered in the frame, while revealing the background with the setting sun. So I set the second point, and since I don't need any more points, I can click on the 3 dots to the right to access the next menu. In most cases, I only use 2 points for smoothest results. It is possible to use more, but avoid big changes in direction, as the result can be very abrupt. Tapping on this icon, we get into reverse, and the hyperlapse will start from the last point, thus saving battery time. But in this case, I leave the sequence as normal. The minimum interval is a shot every 6 seconds, which is way too much. In hyperlapses, I like to use an interval of 2 seconds, exceptionally 3. Otherwise, in the resulting clip, the movement will be way too fast, and the motion blur out of control. Also, if I want a resulting clip of 12 seconds, there won't be enough battery time to complete it. Let's move now to the length of the clip. You can see that this is stuck at 2 seconds for a total of 50 frames, and there is no way to modify it. If I go ahead and hit the red shutter button, the drone will move to the first point and then takes 50 photos, transitioning in a very smooth way into the last one. But the resulting hyperlapse is only 2 seconds long, and the distance between each shot is way too big. Totally useless. When I did the first few hyperlapses with the Mavic 2 Pro, I thought there was something wrong, and it took me several tries before realizing how it works. Basically, in this mode we don't have control on the length of the clip, and therefore of the number of the shot taken, as there is a minimum travel distance between each shot. The aircraft needs to travel about 2 meters, which is 6 feet, before the next shot. This is huge. If you want to get a clip of 10 seconds, which is the minimum for decent result, I need to travel 500 meters, which is way too much. First of all, I cannot keep the drone in visual line of sight according to regulation, and then the resulting hyperlapse will be way too fast. So, I'll try again in the same location, starting once again over the church looking down, but this time I move backwards a lot. I lower the altitude, move a bit to the left, tilt up the gimbal and frame the second point in order to reveal Mount Etna in the background. I end up with this 8-second clip, not long enough for my needs, but cannot get more with one battery. This is not really my idea of a hyperlapse. The movement is way too fast. Motion blur is not optimal, and the clips is not long enough for what I want. In some rare situation I could get some use of hyperlapse of this kind, but in general I need a much subtler movement and a much lower frequency of shot. Waypoint hyperlapse could be the best thing since sliced salami, if it was possible to have a frequency of shot of 3 seconds, or even better 2 seconds, and a much lower distance between each shot. 1 foot or even less. DJI has seriously improved course lock and circle by adding raw files at a frequency of 2 seconds and a much lower minimum speed. Sadly, Waypoints has not been improved. I very much hope there will be some firmware upgrade. It shouldn't be difficult to make the change needed to make this mode the ultimate hyperlapse tool. This is probably the least hyped and certainly not the most spectacular, but it can be useful at times, as it is the only mode allowing changes of elevation at a controlled speed. In course lock and circle, we don't have control of elevation, while in Waypoint, if our movement is mostly ascending, we will have to travel so much that our drone will probably end up in another planet. In this mode we simply choose interval length and max speed, which is a speed with the sticks pushed all the way. As soon as we hit the shutter, it will start to shoot photos, even if the aircraft is not moving. So this mode can be used to shoot simple time lapses, the one where the point of view is static. The speed of the aircraft is the one set in the previous menu, regardless of the mode we are in, normal, tripod or sport. Since we are generally ascending, it makes sense to use the slowest possible speed. If we push the left stick just a tiny bit forward, we can go as low as 0.1 meters per second. We can also combine some forward or sideways movement. It's not really possible to tilt the gimbal, as the resulting movement would be too abrupt. It is a bit tedious, but decent result can be obtained for hyperlapse that cannot be made in any other way. Here are a couple of examples, a bit wobbly, but I'm sure that if I practice a bit, things will get much better. For some reasons, the 8K hyperlapse function in the Air 2 immediately sounded to me like a marketing gimmick. First of all, in this mode it's not possible to save the capture files, so we can rely only on the files automatically generated. This is a big no-no for me. It only works with waypoints and free, not with course lock and circle. The minimum frequency of shot is 6 seconds. And at this point my interest has mostly vanished. It is certainly impossible to get decent result using waypoint, considering the extremely long distance needed between shots. Maybe something could be done using free at extremely low speed. I have done an in-depth review of photography with the Mavic Air 2. You should see a link on screen now. I was very impressed with the quality and versatility of stills with this drone. But the one thing I didn't find particularly impressive is the 48 megapixel photo mode. Practically it multiplies the 12 megapixel of the quad Bayer sensor by 4. But by doing it, the pixels used are extremely small. I can imagine issues in hyperlapses using this method, mostly underexposure and heavy distortion and warping. I read a lot of negative reports about the 8K hyperlapse, malfunctioning, unreadable files, corrupt files, and so on. I did try more than a dozen times to take 8K hyperlapses using the waypoint and free mode, but I kept receiving a message, not enough storage available, or else the hyperlapse would start only to be aborted after a few shots, or else corrupted files. I wasted hours trying to get something after this mode, but this is all I could get. Also, it must be noticed that apparently the files at the moment can only be read with Premiere Pro, and only on Windows-based computers. While I appreciate the fact that DJI is searching for cutting-edge technology, 8K hyperlapse still needs a huge amount of work, and at the moment I would not hold my breath. With the Mavic Air 2, DJI has upped the game for hyperlapses, introducing support for RAW files at 2 frames per second and a lower minimum speed for some modes. From now on, when I go out for a hyperlapse binge, I will probably carry the Air 2 instead of my trusty 2 Pro. But the real game changer will be when DJI will improve the Waypoints mode and add a much lower minimum distance between shots. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Bye for now.